Hello, I'm Jennie Wheildon. I'm a solicitor in the agriculture team at Shakespeare Martineau, and today we will be discussing what it means if you've had your agricultural land allocated under your local authority local plan. And I'll be discussing this with my colleague Lucy Haynes. Lucy is a legal director working for farmers and landowners in our strategic and development land deals. Lucy, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jennie, and it's great to be chatting to you about this today. So I work in our residential development team in Birmingham. It's quite a large team, sort of encompasses around 30 individuals, sort of fee earning in total. And we act and advise landowners on a range of agreements which relate to development of the land. So this includes advice on getting your land ready, to sort of deal with developers, deal with promoters, and then extends to acting in relation to heads of terms, acting on the actual agreements themselves, which will encompass, a number of different sorts of agreements. So the agreements with developers or promoters, but also agreements with other landowners. And then throughout the life of that agreement, generally advising on matters that might come up, queries that might come up, dealing with any variations, and then onward sales. And we also assist with tax advice.
And so can I just ask, so for our listeners today, they will predominantly be landowners. How does it differ in your experience acting for landowners in comparison to the house builders, developers, promoters that you've just mentioned that they might be entering into deals with?
So acting for a landowner, I think really the key thing for us is to ensure that your agreement gets the best price for the land and the best value for the landowner and in the quickest and easiest time possible. And the timing is quite key here because some of these agreements can span a considerable number of years. So it's about trying to put the promoter or the developer under the sufficient amount of pressure to make sure that that they're not just sitting on their laurels and that the things are moving quick enough so that they can get that land value out of it.
All right. That sounds great. So today's all-important question is, what does it mean to have your land allocated under a local plan? Could you explain to us what that actually means? We hear it a lot, but do we actually?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So really, I mean, a local authority will decide as part of their local plan, essentially, what areas of land in that particular local area will be required in order to meet particular sort of developmental objectives that they might have. So things like residential development, any sort of commercial land development, things needed for, I don't know, if they need a new supermarket or new school, right. And what they will do is they will allocate certain land within their local areas that they think looks like it would be a good area to put a new school or a new housing development. So getting land allocated within that local plan essentially means that there is a better chance of getting a planning permission approved by the local authority for that land.
Right, okay. And so a number of our farmers probably at the moment may be thinking about this because we're aware that we're in March 2023 and Warwick Council is currently looking at their local plan. They're asking landowners to come forward with land that they think would be suitable for development. So presumably some of that sort of design element, if you are looking at your land and actually can see that it would be really a prime location, like you say, for a new supermarket or a new school or a housing development, then you might want to suggest to the local authority that this might be an idea. And in terms of putting that together, quite often our landowners will work with their local land agents, and we can recommend the services of Marin's Planning, who are one of our AMPA brand consultants that will work with landowners to help put a submission forward. is there any other suggestions that you can think of there, Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably getting in touch with somebody like Marans or a local land agent is probably the most sensible starting point, particularly if you've got a parcel of land that you think is going to be key as part of that local plan for development. So, for example, I'm thinking of a particular site we've got at the minute, which is next to a train station, which is being upgraded, and that's a great area really then to put the residential development in. But it's also just sort of speaking, I guess, generally with the local authority themselves and asking them questions, because you can you can get a feel really for as to whether or not they've got that appetite. Go along to the meetings and ask them what they're looking for, so that you can see that. But I do think having that advice and that specialist help will get you a better chance of getting that land in that allocation.
That's great. And the meetings presumably with the local authorities, it's that two-way conversation, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What they might want.
Yeah, because as part of their sort of local plan process, they'll hold various consultations. So they'll have consultations with sort of developers and promoters in the area, with land agents. We were at one recently, actually, over in Stratford upon Avon, and that was just sort of talking to the industry about what they want to do. I think it was Warwick actually, that their local plan, talking about what they want to do. But they will have that sort of with the parish councillors as well. So there is an opportunity to sort of put suggestions forward, but also just generally just ask questions, get a feel for what they're looking for.
Okay. And for those landowners then that perhaps hadn't appreciated that this was a two-way conversation, or potentially have their local plans been submitted, or it isn't coming up for review at the moment, is that have they sort of missed out? Is that a missed window, or is there still opportunity to get development on your land?
I definitely say it's not a missed opportunity. I mean, these local plans will have, a certain time frame of, 3, 5, however many years the local authority has decided. And it does happen that land that's already been allocated actually is no longer suitable for whatever reason. So there needs to be, another area found for that particular development parcel. But also, quite often, depending on size in particular, if you've got land that's suitable for, say, 20, 25 houses, actually that might be easier to get permission on, because it still does fulfil the housing need, and it might be, a nice, easy site to get permission on. So it isn't the end of the world, no. And, I think ultimately, if you've got a developer or a promoter knocking on your door asking to speak to you, if your land isn't allocated, there's clearly an interest there, because otherwise they wouldn't be knocking on your door.
Right. Okay. So there's still opportunities there. So moving on slightly. So if we're in a position where our land has been allocated within the local plan for development, what are the next steps then in the process?
So I guess there's sort of two things to consider here. I mean, first of all, you've got sort of what's next in the planning process, which is essentially where you sort of figure out your planning strategy and you work out when you're going to put an application in, when it's appropriate, whether or not you go for what they call a pre-application, which is sort of putting like a tester in, I suppose, with the local authority to say, this is what we're thinking of doing. Are you happy with that? Have you got any objections? Is there anything that you want us to look at? And then thinking about putting your planning application in. But at this stage, really, this is where you want your expertise, and you either want to be doing that with, somebody like Marans, or at this point you want to get your developer or your promoter on board to do that for you. There's no reason why you need to be doing any of that, really. You can take as much or as little involvement in it as you like, but the benefit of having somebody like a developer or a promoter is that they've got that expertise and they can do that for you.
Okay. So it's quite a sort of formulaic process once the allocation's in to test the waters, see what might be acceptable, and then if you're the landowner, if you're planning to work with someone on the development, who are the types of people that you might work with? We've talked about even today about developers and promoters. What is the difference, and why might you choose one over the other?
Okay, so we'll start with the developer. I mean, essentially, the developer is ultimately the person that would be building the houses or the commercial unit or whatever it is that's going to be built. You can work with them at an early stage. Well, you can work with both at an early stage, but you can work with them, in order to get your planning application together, and then ultimately the idea would be with the sorts of, and we'll go on to talk about the agreements that you can do, but the idea would ultimately be that developer would purchase some or all of the land once it's got the benefit of the planning permission. A promoter is slightly different, because they will it'll be the same sort of front end, in that they will take the site through the planning process, but once you've got planning permission, they won't purchase it. It will go out to market, and you'll have a house builder at the end who will purchase it, and then the promoter will take a fee for sort of doing that and helping with that process.
Okay. And does there tend to be a size difference, sort of the number of units that you think, or houses that might be built, or is it just a complete choice really as to what option you go for?
Yeah, it's just a choice, and I suppose it depends sort of who's in that area to talk to, and who's interested. But I mean, we have promoters that will just deal with a smaller site for a few units, or others that will deal with massive sites, sort of up to 1,000 plus units, and the same with developers. It's very much, I guess, who a landowner would like to work with, and who sort of what their land suits. If it's a smaller development, it might actually be that they would prefer to work with a developer because they know that they've got an end user. A bigger site is possibly more beneficial to have a promoter, or maybe work with a developer that's taking more of a hybrid role, so where they will purchase some of the land, but some of it goes to market, just because there are simply too many units for one house builder to take on.
Okay, that's interesting. Especially in terms of that comment of with the developer knowing who your end user is. So perhaps some of those that have got development close to the farmhouse and the farm buildings, and they want to stay and continue farming, then knowing who the end house builder is might be more attractive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it gives them some comfort as well, in terms of if they have quite, as you said, quite a lot of land in the area, or quite a lot of standing in the area as well, if they know that it's going to a house builder that does a nice build, has a good reputation, that can help quite a bit, just sort of in terms of managing that sort of development.
Okay, that's great. And so in terms of then the types of documents that our clients would be entering into, we hear about them being offered option agreements or promotion agreements. What is the difference between those two documents? Okay,
so but first of all, just to explain what an option agreement is, essentially it's an agreement whereby whoever it is, probably a developer, but the other party will enter into that agreement with you to promote your site through the planning process, ultimately get a permission of some form, whether or not it's outlined with reserved matters to come, or whether it's a full permission, and then they will have the option to purchase that property at a specified price. So it'll either be a fixed price that was agreed at the point of exchange, or it'll be based on a calculation, and it's normally a calculation that's sort of market value, but then there will be a discount applied on the basis that party has sort of undertaken some of the risk through the planning process. Then a promotion agreement is essentially the same sort of to start off with. They will take that through the planning process. But then when you get to the point where you have sales, you then sort of take it through a second process, which is a sales process. And the land will go out to market. You'll get bids, or however sort of the agreement wants to work, but you'll get generally bids come in. And then you'll go with the best bid, really. And again, that price then will be set at whatever the bid is. And the promoter will take a proportion of that sale proceeds as payment.
And who is it that normally works out what those prices should be that we've talked about? So the percentage values or the bids. Who is it that normally advises on that?
So it forms part of, I guess, your commercial negotiation. In terms of the actual value, I would definitely recommend getting an agent involved, because they will be able to sort of explain what's common in the market in terms of those percentage discounts and what valuation mechanism you should be using. But we can sort of assist in terms of how we would expect it to look within an agreement.
Yeah.
But that specific valuation really should be done by a surveyor.
Okay. And while we're on sort of the sorts of price point, typically, how is price calculated, and is there anything that sort of needs to be taken into account there?
Yeah, so usually it will be a percentage of market value. So most commonly I'll see that the price will be 90% of the market value. So that will be a calculation. It's usually put forward by the developer. So really we're probably talking about option agreements here, because the promoter will be dictated by the market. But they will sort of say, right, this is the price that we think it is, and these are the deductions, which I'll go through in a minute, sort of some common deductions. And then the landowner will then be able to take advice on that and either agree to that, or there will be a sort of a period of time then to negotiate. Now, the valuation is based usually on what they call the red book valuation, which is what surveyors use. So it's a set sort of calculation based upon the current market. And then in terms of the deductions, so you normally have things like planning costs. So whatever it's cost the developer or the promoter to take it through that process. And then you might have things like the title to the land. So I don't know, a restrictive covenant that, we can't sort out and we have to get insurance, or there are costs involved in getting a release or something. And then those costs would normally come off. What we'd normally recommend for a landowner is that they cap those costs where possible.
Okay, and is that sort of a protection then for the landowners, the cap on what those can reach?
Yeah. So you sort of say, right, okay, well, you can deduct, I don't know, your planning costs, but you can only deduct up to £100,000 for this site. And that's all we're prepared to agree to. I mean, I'm just plucking figures out the air here, but that's what you can do. And then another way of protecting sort of land value in particular is introducing a minimum price mechanism.
Okay.
So what we mean by that is that because it's an option to purchase, or I guess with your promotion agreement it goes out to market, but that you're only obliged to sell if you're selling at a certain price or over that price. So you can always guarantee that if you're losing the land, you're always going to get that minimum price.
Yeah, and I think that's quite important for our listeners to be aware of, because I'm sure you've seen it as well as me, Lucy. There's been horror stories where we have our clients come to us and they've had it's usually an option agreement. It's sometimes phrased maybe as an exclusivity agreement, but it's essentially an option agreement, which on the face of it sets out the price, but then the deductibles is very vague and very open, and ultimately when you sort of scratch the surface of that, the price that the individuals think that they've struck and are going to see at the end of the deal, and when the development comes to fruition actually has been quite watered away and eroded by the deductibles.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, is to make sure that when you're negotiating is that those deductibles are capped and minimised where possible, but also that the minimum price is after those deductibles have been taken into account.
Yeah, after's the key point.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the agreements we're entering into, you sort of touched on it at the outset, Lucy, that these are potentially quite long-term agreements. Typically in the market at the moment, what sort of timeframes are you seeing?
I think, to be honest, this probably largely depends on whether or not land's been allocated or not. Because if it's been allocated, that will be quicker. And it will generally depend on the size of the site as well. But most agreements I'm seeing are between 5 to 10 years, because I would say in terms of planning, it's probably going to take between 3 and 5 years for you to sort of get somewhere within that planning process, unless you've got, what I'd say is like a slam dunk site where you're going to get planning immediately. But in those circumstances, you might want to be looking at a conditional contract and getting the developer or promoter tied up pretty quick.
And do you tend to find then that where they are a slam dunk site, I like that description, that the parties or the agents involved have got a sense that that's going to be the case anyway? So sort of in terms of managing expectations, you sort of have a feel at the outset as to whether it's going to chug along pretty quick.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think I guess this is one of the advantages with working with either a developer or a promoter, is that they want to get to that end goal as quickly as possible. So they will be able to say to you, we think that we could get this through quite quickly, or actually this is going to take some time because we need to make sure that we've got this, this aspect sorted, and we'll need to deal with this. But until you get to that price point, your interests are aligned with getting a planning permission as quickly as possible, because they will want to extract their value from the land as well.
And on that, there are some things, aren't there, Lucy, that we can be doing, or you, our listeners, can be doing ahead of the deal with the developer or promoter to get their land ready and sort of reduce the number of hurdles to development. Such as like land registration and things like that.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think that there's a few things that they can do. I mean, you mentioned land registration. That's probably becoming more and more important now because of the delays at the land registry. So you're looking at, for first registration in some areas, between 1 and 2 years to get the site registered. So that can be quite important, because some developers will insist upon that before they sort of, put any money into those planning obligations. So that can be a good thing to get sorted. And then things like regularising any occupations. So, if you've got tenants on there that don't have a formal document in place that means that you can get them off quickly, then that's what you need to be looking to do.
Yes, and with that, one thing that we see a lot on farming sites, that it is easy to have sort of someone come in to store some cars or caravans or anything really, and those tenancies, it then a question as to whether they are business tenancies and what protected rights may come with those. And whilst we like to hope that the handshake was enough, it's often the case, isn't it, Lucy, where there's development is the driving force to regularise a occupancy, that pound signs enter people's eyes and they become a little bit less amenable than they might have been before. The other one that I've come across quite a bit, Lucy, recently is these flying schools as well. These hobby motor aeroplanes, and that's another one. These sort of hobbyists on the farm.
We've come across a few of those, and I think you're right. It's important to get them regularised as quickly as possible, and almost before you've got the promoter or the developer on scene, because like you say, as soon as people get a whiff of something like that coming down the tracks, everybody wants a slice of the pie, don't they? So if you can put it into just sort of tidying up your land holdings in general, then that's much better, and then you're nicely and well prepared then for when the developer or the promoter does come knocking.
Exactly. And I suppose the other thing to mention at this stage when we're talking about getting land ready for development, and that would be at any stage, to be honest, is your tax position.
Yes, and that's quite important actually. Well, it's very important actually, because particularly when you're dealing with these sorts of agreements in general, but also if you're dealing with any agreements where you're thinking about land pooling, so perhaps with your neighbour, if your neighbour together your site looks pretty good, you really do need to be getting tax advice to make sure that you're making the most of what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely, because there's lots of opportunities but hidden traps and pitfalls there, isn't there? We're not going to go into the tax position in detail today, but absolutely it's all part of the parcel of sort of succession and where you ultimately want the tax bill to lie.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, I think I've covered all of my questions on strategic land and allocation. So thank you ever so much for your time, Lucy.
No problem.
And thank you for those that have joined us on this recording. We hope you found the information useful, timely and relevant. And if you would like to discuss any of the issues raised, or whether your land is suitable for to put forward for a local plan or development, then please do get in touch. Myself or Lucy would be happy to help or make recommendations to the relevant people.